Hey, welcome in Felcha to Random Thoughts from County Antrim, and I'm your host, David McDonnell, on the, what is this? This is the 20th day of June, 2021. And this is my half hour of random thoughts and historical tidbits and yarns and legends and whatever else randomly comes to mind. It is Father's Day, by the way. So for all you dads out there, happy Father's Day. And I did get my Father's Day coffee cup for the occasion. I did a podcast in May, as you may recall, whatever it was, third Sunday in May, whatever it happened to be. And afterwards I was chastised because I forgot to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day. So to all you mothers out there, happy Mother's Day belatedly. And to all your fathers, happy Father's Day. I once, just to show you what a moron I am, years ago, it was Mother's Day, and I had forgotten to wish my wife happy Mother's Day, and she reminded me, you never said happy Mother's Day to me. And my response was, well, you're not my mother. And as you can imagine, that did not go over well. Our children certainly wished her happy Mother's Day, but I had forgotten. And I have not made the same mistake since. So I've learned my lesson. We just got back. Oh, I'll just tell you about festivals. Looks like I'm in two festivals in 2021. I'm going to be at the Indie Irish Festival in Indianapolis in late September. Still haven't figured out the format. It's a wonderful festival. I was there 5-6 years ago, and it was a great festival, and I haven't been back since. But they're doing a scaled-down version. It was several days. Now it's a single day, Saturday. Although they might do some things on Friday night, and I don't know yet, and I don't know where they've slotted me yet. But in September, I will be in Indianapolis. And in October, I'm going to Ocean Shores, Washington, for the Celtic Irish Feis in Ocean Shores. I've been there many, many times. I love it every single time. So we'll be back there in October. And I got a line on one. I won't mention the name yet because I don't want to put pressure on them or whatever. But I got a line on one in November. So we'll see how things are there. And then I was supposed to go to the Dublin Irish Festival in about 2 weeks? About 5 weeks from now. It's the first weekend in August. And the Dublin Irish Festival in Dublin, Ohio is one of the best in the country. Just very well run. They get some wonderful musicians. The volunteers are superb. They go out of their way to make everyone happy. And I was invited to participate again this year. Last year it was virtual. I was invited this year. I was looking forward to it. Kept my fingers crossed in terms of the virus. And when they invited me, they told me they had yet to figure out the format, because it too was going to be a very much scaled down festival. And then I got the word. They did scale it down. They got a wonderful format that's totally appropriate for the pandemic. But by scaling it down, they scaled me completely out. So I'm not going to be at the Dublin Irish Festival. What they decided to do, rather than they run this out of a city park, and it's huge, and there's a indoor facility as well, and there's tents all over the place, and there's thousands and thousands of people roaming around the different tents. And what they're going to do in 2021 is they're calling it the Dub Crawl for Dublin, Ohio. And they're having the musicians, but they're going to be scattered throughout the city at different pubs and different sites. So you don't have 100,000 people in one crowded area. So there'll be spots all over the city where they'll be doing the Dublin Irish Festival, called the Dub Crawl. But they're not going to have a cultural area. They're not going to have an author's area in the process, which means I was one of those who got the axe. So we'll see how that goes in 2022. Yesterday, by the way, was Juneteenth, which is now a national holiday, and I went downstate. First time I've been downstate since I think February. I have two adult children there, and I was in Ypsilanti, and they had huge celebrations for Juneteenth. And I understand a lot of the stores were closed, and it's kind of strange in the sense that it became a national holiday, whatever, Thursday or Friday of this week. And stores and state and local governmental facilities, libraries, etc., were trying to figure out, does that mean we close? I mean, we just found out about this holiday, or that it was a national holiday, and I guess most of them stayed open. But Juneteenth is there'll have to be a shakedown in figuring out how people celebrate Juneteenth. Is it a day off for everybody? Is it a long weekend? Or rather, is it a day when things do stay open, but become devoted to African American history and culture and celebrations, rather than simply another day off like Memorial Day or 4th of July or Labor Day? So we'll see how that works in years to come. But certainly, it's wonderful to have yet another celebration of people in our culture. Actually, going downstate was just another reminder that maybe we're getting over the hump on this pandemic, because I don't travel much. I've been going out to restaurants here and there in small groups. I'll be with some friends that are coming up to my neck of the woods this coming week. But to travel is still a bit iffy, a bit scary. You're not sure the protocol. It is a lot nicer to be vaccinated, but it's still a little bit nervous, especially with the Delta variant, whatever the hell that is. But happy Father's Day, and it reminded me of a friend of mine years ago when he first became a father. He was in the delivery room, and his wife just delivered this beautiful baby girl, and he was ecstatic, just elated at the birth of his first child, and was talking to the mother, and they were trying to come up with some names for this beautiful infant daughter. And the wife then said, well, I've made up my mind what we will call the baby. We will call her Maureen, after my mother. And my friend, the father, was a little bit taken aback by that, because truth be told, he did not particularly care for his mother-in-law. And the thought of naming his child after his mother-in-law just kind of bothered him. He didn't want to look at her and always remember or be reminded of his mother-in-law. But he knew he couldn't say that straight out. He didn't want to make the same mistake I did years ago. So he altered his face, or rather than the dark thoughts he was having about this name, he altered his face so it looked quite agreeable. And he said, Maureen, what a lovely name. Maureen it is. And he said that with a tone of voice as if that was the best choice imaginable. And he said, now that's a fine Irish name. In fact, the girl I almost married before I met you was named Maureen. Beautiful young lady. And he said, yes, the name recalls many, many pleasant memories, and I will always think of her when I look at the beautiful face of our young daughter. Now, the wife remained silent a while, for a minute, 2 minutes, just stone-faced at the comments made by her husband. And then she made her final decision. We'll call her Margaret, after my favorite aunt. And that's a little story which I call the the indirect method. There's a direct method of stating what you want to happen and trying to make it happen. And there's an indirect method. And my friend, in using the indirect method, succeeded in the naming of his brand new daughter. Memorable story here on Father's Day. I thought the next story I tell you is one that I've told very often, quite often. And I often tell it when I do storytelling workshops or when I do talks where I'm trying to demonstrate or illustrate the art or the craft of storytelling. So with that context, let me tell you about an elderly woman who lived in rural Ireland in the decade or then the story takes place in the decade or so after the Great Famine, after the Great Hunger, which was devastating to rural Ireland. And this woman lost her husband to the famine. She lost all of her children except one. And the two of them just barely survived the famine and the typhus. Somehow they got by and survived. And in the years following, it was just as difficult to grow something on a small patch of land, enough to eat and enough to pay rent. And one of the ways over the years they had paid their rent was by growing a pig. If they could get a piglet in the spring, they could spend the summer and fall fattening the pig. And then when rent became due, that was known as Gale Day, and when Gale Day arrived, they could deliver the pig, the fattened pig, to the landlord, and that would be accepted as rent for the year. And that's why in rural Ireland, when people were barely getting by and having very little to eat, if you had a choice between eating or feeding your children or feeding your pig, the choice was made to feed the pig. Because if you did not feed the pig, you could not pay your rent, and you would then become homeless and helpless, hopeless. All that comes from homeless. And they were able to survive for a number of years, in part because her son, as a young adult, was able to steal a piglet and get it over to the house and raise the pig. And from that, they were able to pay the rent and stay on their little patch of land. And in exchange, when they paid the rent with the pig, they would take back not only credit for a year's rent, but another piglet so they could raise that year after year. But one year the piglet didn't make it. The piglet didn't grow fat enough. And the son tried to then supplement, or I should say pay the rent, by going over to the landlord's premises and stealing a pig. Going to take a pig out of the landlord's pig pen, take it to his place, and then re-deliver it to the landlord as rent. But he got caught. And that crime he committed is called poaching. And the penalty for poaching in rural Ireland at the time was transportation. Transportation meant you were sentenced to a period of time in Australia. And the son was sentenced to 20 years in Van Diemen's Land, one of the most horrific penal colonies in Australia. Van Diemen's Land, by the way, is now called Tasmania. So the son was sent to Van Diemen's Land, and the woman now lived all alone on a small patch of land. No money for rent. No money for food. And as she grew more and more feeble, and as she grew older, she could not tend to the little potato patch and to the little garden she had. And so the amount of food she was able to grow was reduced year by year by year, and her ability to pay rent was reduced, and eventually she was evicted from her house. So now she had nothing. She had no food. She had no money. She had no family. She had no one to take care of her. The nearest village was inhabited by people as destitute as she was. So she decided to make her way to the nearest town. We would still call it a village, but it was a little bit larger village where there was a little bit more going on. And she thought maybe if I made it to that village, I could find someone who could help me. Now, that village was several miles away, and for a healthy person, it's not that long of a walk. But as feeble as she was and as old as she was, it took her all day to make it to the village, and it took every ounce of energy that she had. And when she got there, she got to the outskirts of the village, and there was a house on the right-hand side. And the people looked reasonably prosperous in terms of looking at the outside of this house. So she walked up to the door, knocked on the door. A woman came and answered the door, and the elderly lady said to the woman, "Could you please spare just a bite of bread, a small slice of bread, for I have nothing. And I am trying to find some way to survive. All I would need is just a slice of bread." Now the woman, when she heard this, said, "No," and slammed the door. So the elderly woman, she went proceeding a little bit further into the village and came to the next house, knocked on the door. A man answered, opened the door, and she said, "Kind sir, I'm an elderly woman who has nothing. I've lost everything. My family is gone, and I have not eaten for days. Could you spare me just a morsel of food so that I could live another day?" And the man said, "No," and he slammed the door right in her face. Now she continued door to door, working her way into town, and every place she stopped, she got the same response, "No," and slam of the door. Now she eventually made it to the center of the village. There was a little village square there, and there was a modest amount of pedestrian traffic at the center of the village. And she stood along the walkway and stopped people as they walked by and said the same thing. "Could you please spare a shilling or a morsel of food for a woman who has nothing and who has not eaten for days?" And whoever she asked would simply either say no, or would they just keep on walking. No response, no positive response. And she began to notice, because she was on one side of the street, she began to notice people were coming towards her who, when they saw her, would cross the street and walk on the other side. Because these folks didn't even want to be confronted by her. They didn't even want eye contact. They didn't even want the interaction, because they knew their answer was going to be no, and they'd rather not deal with this poor elderly lady. So the lady finally just sat down on the walkway, and she began to cry. And she began to wonder, what am I going to do? I know I cannot survive without help, and I don't know where to go to get help. Now, it was at that time that she heard a horse approaching. And she could tell by the sounds of the horse that it was a large horse. And she looked up and saw down the street there was approaching her a very large horse with a large man on the horse, who had behind him this huge cape that not only covered his back, it went all the way and covered the back and the tail of the horse. And as the man rode into the center of the village, she noticed yet another thing. People began to come out of their homes to welcome him. And often they were carrying a pot of stew or a pan of freshly baked bread or other items of fresh food, bringing it to him. And each of them was saying, "Please come and stay with us. I have this freshly baked bread I will share with you. Or I have this freshly cooked pot of stew which I will share with you. Please come over to our house." Now these were the exact same people who just moments before had slammed their doors in the face of this elderly woman. And you couldn't understand why they were so abrupt and said no to her, but were so willing to share what they had with this man. So she got up from the walkway and walked over to the man. And she tugged at his cape. And the man looked down at her. And she looked up at him. And she said, "Kind sir, are you a king?" The man looked down at her and said, "No, I am not a king." She tugged more at his cape again, and she looked up at him and said, "Well, why do those people offer you food, who are the same people who denied it to me?" And he looked down at her and he said, "I don't know, kind lady. I don't know what is your plight." And he looked at her and he said, "Please, kind lady, what is your name?" The lady looked up at him and said, "My name is Truth." And he said, "Well, I think I understand your problem." And she looked up again and said, "What is your name?" And he said, looked down at her and he said, "My name is Story." And she looked up again and says, "But why do they offer you food and deny it to me?" And he looked at her and he said, "Well, kind lady, everyone loves a good story. But why do they deny it to me?" And he looked at her again and said, "Well, kind lady, nobody likes the truth." And then the man made a proposition to the elderly lady. He says, "Why don't you come with me? I travel all over Ireland on my large horse. Everywhere I go, I tell stories. And everywhere I go, people offer me food and shelter and lodging and hospitality. Why don't you come with me and we will travel Ireland together?" And she said, "Certainly." And then he reached down and grabbed her with one hand and put her behind him on the horse, covered her up with the cape so that people could see him but not her because she was behind the cape. And that's what they did. The two of them traveled all over Ireland, and wherever they went, they told stories. And wherever they went, people offered them food, and they offered them hospitality, and they offered them lodging. And they did that for years and years. And that is why, remember this, that is why in every story there is a little bit of truth. And that's my story of which I call Story and Truth. So that's the end of the podcast today. Please take a look at my my website, as always, clandonald.net. Send me an email with some comments, questions, complaints, whatever, to clandonald@gmail.com. Please like and share this video. Please like and share my Facebook page. And next week, I think we got another week in June. It's not a holiday, so I won't be... Well, maybe it is. I'll have to find out if there's a holiday for the... what would that be? That would be the 27th of June. There's probably a day. You know, I noticed on the calendar the other day, Friday I think it was, Friday was National Flip-Flop Day. Maybe I should have celebrated that on Friday. But maybe there's another holiday next Sunday, in which case we will celebrate that holiday with a story. So goodbye.